There are two kinds of silence: the quiet before a storm, and the quiet of a plan perfectly executed. On the day of the wedding, Maple Ridge was filled with the first kind. A low hum of anticipation, unspoken questions hanging in the humid air. I, standing in the shadows of the church vestibule, was about to introduce the town to the second. I wasn't there to stop a wedding. I was there to correct the record. On that soft, impossibly humid June evening, the bells of St. Matthew's sang their hymn to the bruised twilight sky. From my hiding place, I could smell the overpowering sweetness of lilies, the faint scent of beeswax from the altar candles, and the familiar smell of old, damp wood that was the church's signature perfume. I could hear the whispers moving through the pews, little eddies of gossip carrying truths, half-truths, and delicious speculations. At the altar, bathed in the golden light of a stained glass window, stood my stepbrother, Kyle Harrington. He was a masterpiece of confident presentation, from his tailored navy suit that fit his gym-honed shoulders perfectly to the smile trained for photographs. And beside him, looking like a fragile portrait in ivory lace, was Jenna Harris, the woman who, exactly 1 year ago, had promised me a different forever. 2 weeks before our planned date, she walked away. Today, she stood beside Kyle. She was looking at the crucifix above the altar as if it were a life raft, her knuckles white where she gripped her bouquet. Everyone in those pews knew Kyle as Maple Ridge's own rising star. And they knew Jenna as the girl who used to hold my hand. The town's consensus, a gentle and pitying thing, was that I'd been heartbroken into invisibility. They saw me as Ethan, the quiet one, too kind and too soft for this world. Let them think that. Grief had been the fuel, yes, but the engine was something else entirely. As I watched them at the altar, I wasn't heartbroken. I was a mechanic, checking the lines one last time before starting the engine. I was ready. My movements were quiet and methodical as I double-checked the small, powerful microphone I'd affixed to the back of a support pillar, concealing it within a lush floral arrangement of ferns and baby's breath. I felt the small digital recorder in my coat pocket, its metallic coolness a solid, reassuring weight against my thigh. In the vestibule, I slipped a slim wireless line-in transmitter from my pocket and tucked its pickup behind the floral spray on the pillar. At the sound booth in the back, Richie, the volunteer A/V-Tech whose clattering old Civic I'd fixed for free, had already patched the receiver into an open channel on the board. He looked up and gave me a small, silent nod. I studied Kyle's posture, that triumphant, chin-up angle that seemed to broadcast to the rafters. I won. I always win. I didn't smile. I had no need for it. I only had to wait for the story to find its proper ending. Maple Ridge is a town of shared histories, and mine has been tangled with Kyle's for as long as I can remember. I grew up in a small house behind the old hardware store, a place that always smelled of sawdust and my father's pipe tobacco. When I was 12, my mother, a widow with a hopeful heart, married Kyle's father, a slick widower with an eye for real estate and a portfolio of charming smiles. Suddenly, I had a stepbrother who shared my hallway and my bathroom, but never my view of the world. We competed through our deeds, not our words. When I was 14, I spent a month rebuilding a rusted old Schwinn bicycle I'd found at the dump. I painstakingly sanded the frame, repainted it a deep forest green, and re-greased every bearing until it rode like new. The day I finished, I proudly showed it to my mother and stepfather. Kyle, who had been given a brand new mountain bike for his birthday, just laughed. "Why would you work so hard on garbage?" he'd asked. Later that week, he borrowed my bike to go to the store and came back with the frame dented and a pedal missing. He said he'd tripped. I spent another week fixing it. I learned to fix things: faucets, engines, broken chairs. I learned to find my value in being useful. Kyle, in stark contrast, learned to be seen. He was the one who got the lead in the school play, not because he was the best actor, but because he knew how to charm the drama teacher. He was the one who could talk his way out of a speeding ticket, leaving the officer smiling. Our stepfather encouraged it, seeing a reflection of himself in Kyle's easy confidence. I was the steady, reliable one. Kyle was the star. Our lives were parallel tracks that were never meant to converge, yet we were forced to run alongside each other every day. My happiness came from small, sensory moments. I found my purpose at Mason's Auto, my hands perpetually stained with grease and oil, saving every dollar for a 2-acre plot of land by the old mill. I was going to build a house there, board by board, a legacy of my own 2 hands. Most evenings after work, I stayed late in the shop, long after the others had gone home. There was something meditative about the sound of tools being put away, the metallic clink of a socket wrench echoing in the quiet. I'd wipe my hands on a rag that never quite came clean and step outside to watch the sun drop behind the mill. That place, old and crumbling, looked like failure to most people, but to me it was a promise. I could almost hear the laughter that might fill a house there someday, the scrape of chairs on a wooden floor I built myself. Sometimes, on weekends, I helped old Mr. Dugan fix his tractor, or I'd mow the lot behind the church just because it needed doing. Folks in town started saying, "If it's broken, call Ethan." I liked that. Being useful felt like being seen, even if only in passing. Maybe that's why I never expected much more from life, until Jenna. She didn't see me as just the guy who fixed things. She recognized the dreamer inside the mechanic. When I met Jenna at Margie's diner, it felt as though the universe, after a lifetime of taking, had finally decided to give something back. She was new in town, a graphic designer working remotely, and she had a soft, hesitant laugh that made me want to hear it again. She was sitting alone, sketching in a notebook, and I'd offered to pay for her coffee because she looked like she belonged in a bigger, brighter world than Maple Ridge. "No, thank you," she'd said, looking up with eyes the color of moss after a rain. "But you can sit with me if you like." I showed her the Saturday farmers market, the hidden trail that led to the base of the falls, the quiet corners of the town that held its soul. I took her out on the lake in a small rowboat, and under a canopy of stars, I told her about my dream of building a home, of having a place that was truly mine. She'd squeezed my arm, her head resting on my shoulder as the water lapped against the boat. "I want that," she'd whispered. "With you." In that moment, I felt seen in a way I never had before. But Kyle always noticed what another person cherished, especially if he perceived it as a prize he was entitled to win. The first time he met Jenna, at a town barbecue, I watched his eyes do a quick, appraising sweep. He saw her beauty, but he also saw how much she meant to me, and that made her irresistible to him. He started showing up, always with a plausible reason. He'd bring expensive craft beer to our cookouts and raise a bottle to young love, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. I saw the signs, a lingering glance, a shared joke I wasn't privy to, but I chose to trust the foundation we had built. I was a man who believed that, in the end, goodness and quiet dedication were their own reward. The great danger, of course, was that Kyle believed the exact same thing, but for himself. The unraveling began quietly. It started with the yoga class. Jenna said she was meeting her friend Sarah, but when I called Sarah later, she mentioned she hadn't seen Jenna all week. That night, I found the unused class pass on the kitchen counter, tucked beneath a stack of mail. "Oh, I left it there by mistake," she'd said. "We ended up just getting coffee instead." I nodded, the desire to believe her stronger than the cold prickle of suspicion. Then came the late-night texts. Her phone, which used to lie screen up on the nightstand, was now always placed screen down. Silences began to grow like weeds between our words. One evening, she came home from a girls' night, wearing a denim jacket I'd never seen before. The sleeves were too long, and when I helped her take it off, I caught the faint, unmistakable scent of a musky, expensive cologne. It was Kyle's cologne. "I found it at the bar," she'd said, avoiding my eyes. "Someone must have left it." I believed her, or rather, I forced myself to. That was my shape in the world. The man who believed, the man who fixed, the man who held things together, even when they were cracking in his hands. The final, shattering break came 2 weeks before our wedding. I'd spent the entire day finishing the magnificent wooden arch for the ceremony. Jenna came home, found me admiring my work, and stood beneath it as the afternoon sun stretched long across the yard. "I can't do this, Ethan," she said. "I can't marry you," she cried. There were a lot of tears. She spoke of timing, confusion, needing to find herself, but she never once spoke Kyle's name. Then she left. Her words were still echoing in my head when I found myself driving past Kyle's apartment. A single window was lit, and on the balcony stood two figures in a close embrace. One was unmistakably his. The other, with that cascade of hair, was Jenna. It wasn't the click of puzzle pieces falling into place. It was the sickening grind of gears shearing off, of an engine seizing all at once. I didn't yell. I didn't slam the accelerator. I just felt everything inside me shudder to a violent halt. I drove back and left the arch standing in the yard, a monument to a promise that had moved elsewhere. When I woke in the cold gray of dawn, the heat of grief had cooled, hardening into something more useful: steel. I began to plan. The grief that followed was not a fire. It was a cold, deep well I had fallen into. For the first few months, I didn't plan. I survived. I went to work at Mason's Auto, my movements mechanical, my mind blessedly empty as I focused on replacing brake pads and changing oil. I smiled politely when people offered their condolences as if someone had died. In a way, someone had. Maple Ridge began its quiet narrative. Jenna and Kyle were seen at the diner, then at the farmer's market. Their relationship wasn't a secret. It was a headline. The town settled on a story of tragic, whirlwind romance, casting me as the gentle, heartbroken collateral damage. Their pity was a constant, low-grade humiliation. Hoping for an anchor, I called my mother. I didn't ask her to choose. I just needed to hear that what he did was wrong. "Ethan," she said, her voice laced with a weary desire for peace, "I love both of you boys. I can't be put in the middle." Her neutrality felt like a final betrayal. I was truly alone. The shift from grief to action wasn't a decision. It was a necessity. It began 6 months later with a phone call from my bank about suspected fraud. Charges I hadn't made, all to a high-end online wine shop Jenna loved. I remembered Kyle running the tab with my card months ago on a double date. He must have copied the numbers. He was arrogant, but I never thought he was that stupidly cruel. The fraud freeze on my account caused my rent check to bounce. My landlord, a man who valued punctuality over pity, gave me 5 days to pay or get out. With my savings drained by the wedding that never happened, I had nothing. I packed my life into a few cardboard boxes and moved into the back room of Mason's Auto, sleeping on a cot between a stack of old tires and a rust-stained sink. It was there, in the cold air that smelled of oil and rust, that grief finally hardened into purpose. I was no longer just heartbroken. I had been erased. My home, my future, my name, he was taking it all. Lying on that cot at night, listening to the rain on the tin roof, I stopped asking why. I started asking how. My small corner of the garage became a war room. By day, I fixed cars. By night, under a single bare bulb, I began to meticulously dismantle my stepbrother's life on paper. I used the garage's spotty Wi-Fi to become a detective of my own wreckage. I researched Harrington renovations and found a trail of digital breadcrumbs. Online reviews complaining about unfinished work, forum posts about bounced checks to suppliers, and a glaring absence of proper permits in the county records. Then, one Tuesday about 6 months after she left, Instagram showed me what I already suspected. A photo of Jenna, a diamond on her finger, smiling beside Kyle. The date was in the caption, June 14th. 6 months. The clock had officially started. My investigation gained a new urgency. I knew from years of observation that Kyle had routines. Every Tuesday night, he'd hold court at Margie's diner after it turned into a low-lit bar. He'd drink too much whiskey and brag. For weeks, I watched him. Finally, I picked my night. I found him coming out of the alley just past midnight, loosened by alcohol and his own self-satisfaction. I stepped out of the shadows, making sure I looked defeated, smaller than I was. "Kyle," I started, my voice intentionally rough. I have to ask. I don't understand how it all happened so fast." He clapped me on the shoulder, his breath thick with victory. It was the condescending pity I was counting on. "Look, man," he slurred, leaning in conspiratorially. "She wanted out. I just held the door. You gotta know when to seize the moment. Ethan's a good guy, and you know what they say about good guys. They finish last. Or in his case, unpaid. My phone, safely in my breast pocket with the voice recorder on, caught every single word. Over the next year, I gathered the rest. A quiet conversation with the Armstrongs, who confirmed Kyle took their deposit for a lake house repaint and vanished. An anonymous tip to Mrs. Avery at the fair committee, complete with documents I'd found in public records, which led to his lucrative contract being pulled. Each piece was a gear clicking into place. I wasn't driven by rage anymore. I was a mechanic, assembling a machine of perfect, undeniable truth. The night before the wedding, I stood on the dock by the lake. Across the water, the lights from their rehearsal dinner glowed. Their laughter drifted on the breeze, but it didn't hurt me. It was just noise. The machine was built. It was time to turn the key. At dawn, I laid out my evidence on a workbench. The crystal-clear audio file, copies of the Armstrongs' contract, and pages from Kyle's own ledger I'd gotten from a disgruntled supplier he'd never paid. In it, his scrawl tracked side cash and favors. Jenna's initials, J.H., appeared next to several dates that matched the nights she'd supposedly been at yoga. One entry was chillingly specific: April 12th, J.H., bottle plus cash. The night she claimed she had hot yoga. I ironed my best shirt, shaved with a steady hand, and walked to the church. In the vestibule, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and beeswax. From the shadows behind a large floral arrangement, I saw Richie at the sound booth in the back. He was pretending to adjust a dial, but his eyes met mine for a fraction of a second before he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The plan was set. The organ music swelled and then softened. The ceremony began. I listened to the familiar words, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't the frantic pulse of fear or anger. It was the calm, powerful thrum of an engine ready to engage. When the pastor finally reached the line, his voice echoing slightly in the hushed sanctuary, "If anyone has cause why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." The traditional silence that followed felt different. It was heavy, expectant. I didn't stand. I didn't shout. From my coat pocket, I slipped out the small digital recorder and pressed a single button. A soft click, a breath of static, and then Kyle's voice, amplified through the church's speakers, filled the sanctuary. It was unmistakable, slurred with whiskey and thick with arrogance. She wanted out. I just held the door. You gotta know when to seize the moment. Ethan's a good guy, and you know what they say about good guys. They finish last, or in his case, unpaid. A wave of murmurs washed through the pews. Heads turned. People exchanged confused, then knowing glances. At the altar, Kyle's confident smile faltered, then collapsed entirely. Jenna went as white as her dress, her eyes darting around the church as if looking for the source of the voice. That was my cue. I stepped out from the shadows and began the long walk down the center aisle. Every eye was on me. "Pastor," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the stunned silence. "I won't be long. I will not make an accusation. I will only present what is already true." I reached the altar and opened the folder I was carrying. I placed the first document on the pristine white cloth. "This is a signed contract between Harrington Renovations and the Maple Ridge Fair Committee," I said, looking not at Kyle, but at the congregation. "They paid a $5,000 deposit for work that was never started. The deposit was never returned." In the third pew, Mrs. Avery, head of the committee, gave a firm, decisive nod. I laid down the second paper. "This is a contract for the Armstrongs' lake house repaint. Another deposit taken, another job abandoned." The dates on these invoices match the evenings Jenna was said to be finding herself. Finally, I placed the ledger on top. "And this," I said, my voice dropping lower, "is Kyle's private ledger. It tracks cash payments and favors. Jenna's initials are here, next to notes I will not read aloud in a house of God." Kyle took a menacing step toward me, his face a mask of fury. You have no right. I'm not ruining anything, I said, my voice even and calm. I am simply correcting the story. This one was built on a lie. Jenna's bouquet slipped from her trembling fingers. White roses scattered across the marble floor, their silent petals like apologies left unsaid. Her whisper was a fractured, broken thing. I didn't know, she cried, looking from the papers to me. I didn't know about any of this. I looked at her then, and for the first time, I saw not the woman who betrayed me, but the woman who had been fooled by the same charming facade. I know you didn't, I said softly, but now you do. The wedding did not end in a dramatic scene. It simply stopped. There were no more vows, no signing of a license, only a deep, profound silence as the truth settled over the room, collapsing the entire affair under its own weight. In the weeks that followed, Maple Ridge did what it always does. It talked. But this time it had facts. Witnesses from the church confirmed everything. Other clients of Kyle's came forward with similar stories. The Armstrongs filed a formal complaint. The fair committee sued. Detectives started asking questions Kyle's charm couldn't answer. One night, he was simply gone, leaving in a leased truck with more debt than he had gas in the tank. Jenna moved into a small apartment above the florist shop. She didn't leave town. She took a second job waiting tables at the diner and, piece by piece, paid back every dollar the Armstrongs had lost. She didn't ask for forgiveness from anyone. She worked for it one quiet, exhausting day at a time. I stayed at Mason's Auto. I slowly rebuilt my savings. 2 months later, my old rental house came up for sale and I bought it. The magnificent wooden wedding arch I had built still stood in the yard, a monument to a promise. I took it apart, board by board, sanded away the old varnish, and turned the timber into 2 sturdy benches. I placed them at the lookout point overlooking the falls, and on one, I burned a small plaque, for sitting with what is true. Months later, I saw Jenna at the farmer's market. We were standing on opposite sides of a stall of autumn squashes. She looked tired, but her eyes were clear. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice steady, "for not letting it go, for showing me the truth." "I did let it go," I replied, "and I meant it. I let you go. The truth just deserved to be seen." We nodded, a silent acknowledgement of everything that had passed between us, and walked away in opposite directions. That spring, I finally bought the 2-acre plot of land by the old mill. Each night after work, I'd sit on my porch and sketch plans for a small house with a wraparound porch and big windows. I started spending my weekends out on the property, clearing brush, driving fence posts, just feeling the solid earth under my boots. The quiet out there didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. Sometimes I'd picture the life I almost had, the wedding, the family photos, and realize it was never truly mine to begin with. What I was building now didn't need to prove anything to anyone. It wasn't about revenge or even redemption. It was about creating something honest from the wreckage. I'd pour the foundation myself, set every beam and nail with intention. Maybe one day someone would share that home with me. But for the first time in my life, I didn't need that thought to make it worth doing. There was no triumph, no gloating, only peace. Because when someone tries to steal your future, the truest victory isn't to strike a match in return. It's to pick up a hammer and build again, stronger and truer on your own terms.